When billionaire Victoria Pemberton arrived at her son's grave on the one-year anniversary of his death at 8:47 a.m. on a cold November morning, she expected to find flowers and silence and the crushing weight of grief she'd carried for 365 days, each one harder than the last because time wasn't healing anything, despite what well-meaning people kept telling her at charity galas where she had to pretend she was functioning, when really she was just breathing and calling that survival. What she found instead was a young black woman and a toddler sitting beside the headstone, the woman's hand pressed against the marble like she was touching something sacred, something that belonged to her. The child playing with toy cars in the grass that Victoria's groundskeepers kept perfectly manicured, because even in death, her son deserved perfection, deserved care, deserved the best of everything she'd tried to give him his entire 28 years. Victoria froze 20 feet away, rage and confusion battling in her chest because this was her private grief. Her son's grave in the family plot she'd purchased decades ago when her husband died, and she'd had to imagine a future where she might need space for herself and Cameron someday, though she'd never imagined needing it this soon, never imagined burying her only child before she turned 65. These strangers had no right to be here, no connection to Cameron Pemberton, whose name was carved in stone alongside the dates that bracketed 28 years of life, cut short by a car accident that had destroyed Victoria's world so completely she still sometimes forgot he was gone, still sometimes picked up the phone to call him before remembering there was no one to call. But then the woman turned, tears streaming down her face, and said 4 words that would shatter everything Victoria thought she knew about her son, 4 words that would crack open grief that was already unbearable and reveal depths of loss she hadn't known existed. He loved us too. Victoria Pemberton was 63 years old and had spent 42 of those years building Pemberton Industries from a small pharmaceutical startup into a billion-dollar empire that employed 15,000 people and developed medications that saved lives and generated wealth she'd accumulated not for luxury, but for legacy, for something to pass to Cameron, for proof that a widow who'd lost her husband when her son was 10 could still build something that mattered. She'd raised Cameron alone after that, poured everything into him, every ounce of energy and ambition and love she possessed, made him heir to an empire, but also tried to make him kind, tried to teach him that wealth was responsibility, not just privilege, though looking back she wondered if she'd suffocated him with expectations disguised as love. Cameron had died 1 year ago in a car accident that was sudden and senseless and offered no warning, no chance for the goodbye, no final conversation where Victoria could have said the things she'd assumed she'd have decades to say. One moment he was alive, calling her from his car to say he'd stop by the estate later that evening because he needed to talk to her about something important. The next moment, police were at her door with the kind of news that splits your life into before and after, into the person you were and the person you have to become when the thing you loved most in the world is gone. Victoria's grief had consumed her in ways she hadn't known grief could, had made her barely functional despite the facade she maintained at board meetings and charity events, had turned weekly grave visits into sometimes daily pilgrimages when the silence of the estate became unbearable, and she needed to be near the only part of Cameron she had left. Today was the 1-year anniversary, the most painful day since the funeral, and Victoria had come early specifically to be alone with her son, to have this private moment of devastating remembrance before the day demanded she be the controlled billionaire philanthropist instead of the mother who'd lost everything. She'd arrived at the private cemetery section, the family plot cordoned off by iron gates and old money and the kind of exclusivity that ensured privacy even in death, and found them there. A young black woman, mid-20s, wearing jeans and a worn jacket that suggested she didn't belong in spaces where groundskeepers maintained perfect grass and marble headstones cost more than cars. And a toddler, maybe 2 or 3 years old, playing with toy cars on the grass, like this was a park instead of a cemetery, like he had every right to be here making noise where Victoria came to weep in silence. The woman was crying, her hand pressed flat against Cameron's headstone, like she was trying to feel something through the marble, like she was touching him instead of stone. The child, oblivious to adult grief, made quiet car sounds, vrooming his toys across grass that was never supposed to be disturbed by anything except flowers and tears. Victoria's immediate reaction was anger, the kind that comes from grief violated, from sacred space invaded. "Excuse me," she said, her voice carrying the authority of someone used to being obeyed without question. "This is private property. You need to leave. Now." The woman turned slowly, and Victoria saw her face was young but worn, beautiful but exhausted, marked by the kind of crying that happens often enough to leave permanent shadows. "He loved us too," the woman said quietly, her voice breaking around words that made no sense. "What are you talking about?" Victoria demanded, stepping closer, her confusion sharpening into something that felt like fear, though she couldn't name why. "Who are you? How do you know my son's name?" The woman stood, wiped her face with shaking hands, and lifted her chin with the particular dignity of people who've been dismissed their entire lives but have decided this time they won't be moved. "My name is Bethany Cole," she said. Cameron was. She paused, looked at the toddler playing in the grass, then back at Victoria with eyes that held terror and defiance in equal measure. "This is his son. Our son. If you believe that the people we love most sometimes carry entire lives we never see, subscribe to Love is Kindness. For stories about what happens when secrets kept for love break open after death. Have you ever discovered something about someone you lost that changed everything you thought you knew about them? Tell us in the comments and let us know where you're watching from." "That's impossible," Victoria said, her voice sharp with the kind of denial that comes from having your reality cracked open when you're already barely holding yourself together. "Cameron didn't have a child. I would have known. He told me everything. We were close. He couldn't have kept something like this from me." But even as the words left her mouth, Victoria was looking at the toddler playing in the grass, really looking at him for the first time, and her breath caught because the resemblance was undeniable in ways that made lying impossible. The child had Cameron's eyes, that particular shade of hazel that came from Victoria's mother, had his smile, the way his mouth curved up more on one side, had his features arranged in a face so young and innocent, but so clearly, devastatingly her son's face recreated in miniature. "He didn't tell you," Bethany said quietly, her voice carrying years of guilt and justification tangled together. "He wanted to. God, he wanted to so badly it was destroying him, but he was afraid." Victoria's head snapped up. "Afraid of what? Afraid of me?" Bethany met her eyes. "Yes, because I made him afraid, because I told him we had to wait." Bethany's story came out slowly, painfully, each word feeling like confession. She'd met Cameron 4 years ago when she was a graduate student in biomedical engineering, and he was just starting work at his mother's company, the heir learning the business from the ground up the way Victoria had insisted, because privilege without competence was just inheritance waiting to be squandered. They'd met at a university industry research collaboration, had bonded over late nights in labs and shared dreams about using pharmaceutical development to help people instead of just generating profit, had fallen in love in that particularly intense way people do when they're young and idealistic, and haven't learned yet that love doesn't solve the practical problems class and race and family expectations create. She'd gotten pregnant 2 years into their relationship, unplanned and terrifying, because Bethany was still in graduate school and Cameron was still learning to run a billion-dollar company, and neither of them had anticipated becoming parents before 30. Cameron had wanted to tell Victoria immediately, had been ready to introduce Bethany as his girlfriend, announce the pregnancy, ask for his mother's support in building a family. But Bethany had said no. She'd researched Victoria extensively by that point, had read every business profile and society page feature, had learned Victoria Pemberton's reputation for being controlling and fiercely protective of Cameron in ways that crossed from maternal love into something more suffocating. Had learned the Pemberton family history, old money going back 4 generations, exclusive social circles where people like Bethany, black and working class and first in her family to attend college, simply didn't exist except as diversity statistics or charitable causes. "I didn't want him to have to choose," Bethany said, her voice breaking, "between you and us, between his mother and his family. I knew you'd never approve. I knew you'd think I was after his money, that I'd gotten pregnant to trap him, that I was some." And she paused, searching for the words Victoria would have used. Some opportunistic girl trying to climb into a world where I didn't belong. "So I told him we should keep it secret," Bethany continued, tears streaming freely now. "Just until I graduated. Just until I could prove I was finishing my degree, that I had my own career plans, that I wanted him, not his money. Just until the timing was better, until Noah was older, until there was some perfect moment when telling you would be less terrifying." Cameron had visited them secretly for 2.5 years, had loved Bethany and loved Noah with the kind of devotion that made the secrecy torture him, had been torn between his mother, who'd given him everything and sacrificed her own happiness to raise him alone, and his family who he was building but couldn't acknowledge publicly. He'd wanted to tell Victoria constantly, had brought it up every few months, but Bethany kept saying, "Not yet," kept pushing back the deadline, kept making him hide the best part of his life because she was too afraid of Victoria's rejection to risk the confrontation. "The guilt destroyed him," Bethany said. "I watched it eat him alive. He'd come to our apartment after visiting you, and he'd hold Noah and cry because he was lying to you every day and it was killing him. But I kept saying, wait, just a little longer, just until this or that was resolved, and he kept waiting because he loved me, and he didn't want to force me into a situation where I'd be attacked or rejected or have to defend our relationship to someone who had all the power." Cameron had been driving to Bethany's apartment the day he died, she explained, her voice hollow with grief that had clearly been building for a year. He'd finally decided. Had called her 20 minutes before the accident and said, "I'm telling her today about you, about Noah, about us being a family. I can't do this anymore. I can't keep lying to my mother. She deserves to know she has a grandson. You deserve to be acknowledged. Noah deserves to have a grandmother. I'm done hiding." Bethany had been waiting. Had been, for him at her apartment, had the dinner table set, had been planning to celebrate his courage, when the news broke across every channel. Cameron Pemberton, heir to Pemberton Industries, dead at 28 in a single-car accident on the highway. "He died before telling you," Bethany whispered. "Died keeping my secret because I was too afraid to let him tell the truth." "He died keeping my secret," she repeated, the guilt naked in her voice. "If I'd let him tell you sooner, maybe he wouldn't have been so stressed. Maybe he wouldn't have been driving that particular road that particular day. Maybe the distraction of carrying this enormous secret wouldn't have contributed to whatever happened in that car. I killed him by making him hide us, by making him choose between honesty with you and protecting me from you. I killed him." Victoria's internal struggle played across her face in ways she couldn't control, shock and grief and anger and something more complicated mixing together. She was looking at this woman, this child, trying to comprehend that Cameron had lived an entire life she knew nothing about. Had a girlfriend he loved enough to hide for years. Had a son, a grandson Victoria never knew existed. Cameron had been going to tell her that day, had been driving to his death trying to bridge the gap Bethany had created between his two families, trying to fix a problem that had been slowly destroying him for 2.5 years. "Why are you here now?" Victoria asked, her voice raw. "After a year, why reveal yourself now?" Bethany looked at Noah, still playing innocently. "I've been coming every week," she said, "when you're not here. I checked your public schedule, your appearances, figured out when you typically visit. Noah asks about his daddy. I bring him here. Let him talk to the stone because it's the closest he can get to the father who loved him but died before he was old enough to remember him properly. Today I thought you wouldn't come. Anniversary is usually private family time. I assumed you'd want to be alone." I was wrong. "Why didn't you come to the funeral?" Victoria demanded, anger creeping into her voice. "If Cameron was, if you were, why didn't you stand with me? Why didn't you let me know?" Bethany's answer came quiet but firm. "I did. I stood in the back. You wouldn't have known me. Just another face in the crowd. I left before anyone could ask who I was because I had no right to public grief. I was the secret, the hidden part of his life. I didn't belong in your grief." "Why didn't you reach out after?" Victoria asked. "Why didn't you tell me about Noah? Give me a chance to know my grandson?" Bethany shook her head. "Because nothing changed when Cameron died. I'm still the woman who kept your son's child secret, who made him lie to you for 2.5 years, who put him in the position that got him killed. Why would you want anything to do with me? Why would you believe I wasn't just after money now that he's gone?" Bethany reached into her bag, with shaking hands, and pulled out a photograph, worn from being carried and looked at and cried over for a year. Cameron holding newborn Noah in the hospital, his face showing pure joy, the kind of happiness that comes from becoming a father, from holding your child for the first time, from feeling your world expand in ways you didn't know were possible. "He was a good father," Bethany said, offering the photo to Victoria, the little time he had, before the hiding and the guilt made every moment bittersweet. Victoria took the photograph with hands that trembled, stared at her son holding his son, and broke completely. "He looks happy," she whispered, tears streaming down her face because Cameron was smiling in the photo in ways she'd never seen him smile in the last few years, in ways that suggested he'd found something she couldn't give him, something that mattered more than the empire she'd built for him or the expectations she'd loaded onto his shoulders. "He was," Bethany confirmed quietly, "when he was with us. When he could forget that he was lying to you. When he could just be Noah's dad and my partner and not the Pemberton heir carrying secrets that were destroying him. He was happy." Victoria stared at the photograph for a long time, at her son's joy captured in pixels and paper, then looked up at Noah playing in the grass, this small child who carried Cameron's features and his legacy, and proof that her son had built something beautiful that she'd never been allowed to see. "You were right to be afraid of me," Victoria said, her voice breaking around words that felt like shards of glass in her throat. Bethany's head snapped up, confusion mixing with shock. "What?" Victoria set the photograph down carefully on Cameron's headstone, like she was returning something sacred to its rightful place. "I would have thought exactly what you feared," she said, each word measured and honest in ways that cost her everything to admit. "I would have assumed you wanted money. I would have looked at a black graduate student dating my son and thought you were after his inheritance, his status, his name. I would have had investigators look into your background, would have found the poverty, the working class family, the student loans, and I would have used all of it as evidence that you weren't good enough, that you were opportunistic, that you were a threat to everything I'd built for Cameron." Victoria's voice gained strength as the confession continued, as she spoke truths she'd never had to acknowledge when Cameron was alive to protect her from them. "I would have tried to separate you from Cameron, would have offered you money to disappear, would have threatened legal action, would have used every resource and connection I had to end your relationship, because I couldn't see past my own fear of losing him. I would have destroyed the one thing that made my son truly happy, the family he was building, the life he wanted, all because I was too controlling to let him make his own choices." "You protected him from me," Victoria said, looking Bethany directly in the eyes. "You were right to be afraid. Everything you worried I'd do, I would have done. Cameron knew that. That's why he was afraid." "But he wanted you to know," Bethany said, her voice thick with tears and something that sounded like desperation. "He wanted Noah to know his grandmother. He talked about it constantly, about how you'd love Noah once you met him, how you'd be an amazing grandmother if you just had the chance. He wanted us to be family. All of us. Not him choosing between his mother and his partner, but everyone together. That's what he died trying to create. And I took that from him, from you, from Noah. I made him hide something he wanted to celebrate. I turned his joy into a secret he had to carry alone." Victoria shook her head, grief and rage at herself and the universe creating something too complex for simple words. "He died alone because we both failed him," she said. "You made him hide. I made him afraid. We both loved him so much we suffocated him. You with your fear that you weren't good enough. Me with my need to control everything in his life because I'd already lost his father and couldn't bear to lose him too. We put him between us and made him choose, and he died trying to please us both, trying to bridge a gap that neither of us would admit existed until it was too late." Noah, oblivious to the adult grief and reckoning happening 10 feet away, finished playing with his toy cars and toddled over to Victoria with the particular confidence of 2-year-olds who haven't learned yet to be afraid of strangers. "Who you?" he asked, looking up at this woman who was crying like his mama cried sometimes, his small face showing curiosity without fear. Victoria knelt down slowly, bringing herself to his eye level, tears streaming down her face faster than she could wipe them away. She started, then stopped, looked at Bethany, who nodded permission through her own tears. I'm your grandma. Grandma, Noah repeated, testing the word without fully understanding it, his small forehead wrinkling with the effort of processing new information. He looked at the headstone behind them, at the flowers Victoria had brought, at the name carved in marble. That's my daddy, he said matter-of-factly, the way children state facts they've learned but don't fully comprehend. My daddy's sleeping in the ground. Mama says he's watching me from heaven. Victoria broke completely then. This billionaire who'd built an empire and faced down corporate rivals and survived widowhood and a year of grief she'd thought was the worst thing she could endure, broke at the simple honesty of a 2-year-old who knew his daddy was dead, but didn't understand that this meant Victoria had lost her son, that Bethany had lost her partner, that all three of them were connected through the same devastating absence. Let me know him, Victoria said to Bethany, still kneeling beside Noah, her voice raw with need and grief and hope she'd thought she'd lost. Please. Let me know my grandson. Let me be part of his life. It's what Cameron wanted, even if I don't deserve it. Even if I would have failed him a year ago, even if I'm the reason he was afraid, even if I'm everything you worried I'd be. Let me try to be what Cameron believed I could be. What he died believing I'd become if you gave me the chance. I don't want your money, Bethany said immediately, the words automatic, defensive. Victoria stood, faced her. I'm not offering money. I'm offering family. Cameron wanted Noah to have a grandmother. He told you that, didn't he? Bethany nodded, fresh tears falling. He said, Bethany's voice broke, mimicking Cameron's voice from memory, my mom will love him once she meets him. I know she will. She'll see him and forget every reservation, every fear, every reason she thinks we're wrong for each other. Because he's perfect. And he's ours. Victoria's breath hitched. He was right, wasn't he? Move into the estate, Victoria said, the offer coming fast before she could second-guess it, before grief and pride could stop her from doing what Cameron had died trying to accomplish. Not as an employee, not as a guest, as family. Noah should grow up knowing his father's home, walking the halls Cameron walked, playing in the gardens where he played. Cameron's room is still exactly as he left it. I couldn't bear to change anything. Noah should have it, should know where his father slept, should have his father's space transformed into his own. Bethany hesitated, and Victoria saw the fear still there, the worry that this was charity disguised as family, that acceptance came with strings. I can't bring Cameron back, Victoria said quietly. Can't undo the year you spent alone with Noah, can't erase the 2 years he spent lying to me, can't fix the fact that we both failed him. But I can be the grandmother he wanted me to be, can try to love you the way he loved you, can give Noah the family Cameron died trying to create. On one condition, Bethany said finally. Victoria nodded immediately. Anything. We tell Noah the truth, Bethany said, her voice firm despite the tears. Always. About his father, about both of us failing him, about why Cameron had to hide us, about your controlling nature and my fear and how we both made choices that hurt him. He deserves to know Cameron died trying to make us family, deserves to know his father loved him enough to finally demand the truth. Victoria met her eyes. Yes, she said, all of it. The good and the bad, the love and the failure. He deserves to know who his father really was and who we really are. 2 years later, the world looked different in ways that would have been impossible to imagine standing at Cameron's grave that November morning. Noah was 4.5 years old, thriving in ways that children do when they're loved unconditionally by multiple people who've learned hard lessons about putting children's needs above adult fears. He lived at the Pemberton estate with Bethany, not in the guest wing, but in what Victoria now called the family wing, Cameron's old room transformed into Noah's room, while keeping enough of Cameron's things that Noah understood this had been his father's space first, understood he was inheriting more than just a bedroom, but a legacy. Victoria and Bethany had become close in ways that surprised them both, not just grandmother and daughter-in-law connected by obligation and grief, but genuine friends who'd learned to love each other through the shared work of raising Noah and honoring Cameron's memory by being the family he'd wanted them to be. Noah called Victoria Grandma Vicky, with the unself-conscious affection of a child who'd never known her as the controlling billionaire, but only as the grandmother who read him stories and taught him about his father and showed up consistently with love that didn't demand perfection in return. Victoria had scaled back her work at Pemberton Industries, promoted a successor, and moved to chairman of the board so she could spend time with Noah, could be present in ways she now realized she hadn't been fully present even for Cameron, too focused on building empire to notice she was losing connection with the person the empire was supposed to be for. Bethany had finished her graduate degree with Victoria's support, not financial support disguised as charity, but actual family support. Victoria attending her graduation and crying with pride for this woman who'd loved her son and was building her own career while raising Cameron's child. They visited Cameron's grave together every week, the three of them, a ritual that honored Cameron by proving his dream had come true even if he hadn't lived to see it. Noah's 5th birthday fell on a Saturday in spring, and they went to the cemetery that morning before the party planned for the afternoon. "Happy birthday to me, Daddy," Noah said, placing a drawing on the grave, a picture he'd made of himself and Bethany and Victoria, all three holding hands with a sun drawn in the corner, and family written in shaky letters across the top. "We're family now, like you wanted." Victoria and Bethany stood on either side of Noah, holding hands across him, both crying in that way women do when grief and joy mix together until you can't separate them. "Why you crying?" Noah asked, looking up with confusion that came from being 5 and having a birthday and not understanding why happy moments made adults cry. "It's my birthday. You supposed to be happy." "We are happy, sweetheart," Victoria said, kneeling down to his level. "These are happy tears. Sometimes people cry because they're sad, and sometimes they cry because they're so happy they don't know how else to show it." Noah considered this, then looked at his father's headstone. "Daddy's happy too," he declared, with the certainty of a child who believed in heaven and angels and fathers who watched from somewhere beyond. I tell. Victoria had founded a scholarship program 6 months after Noah moved into the estate, the Cameron Pemberton Memorial Scholarship for first-generation college students, specifically targeting students from working-class backgrounds pursuing degrees in sciences and engineering. Bethany helped run it, brought her own experience as a first-generation student to the selection process, and together they'd awarded scholarships to 32 students in 2 years. "My son loved someone I would have rejected," Victoria told the inaugural scholarship recipients at the award ceremony. "He died before I could learn better, before I could understand that my fears about who was good enough for him were really fears about losing control, about him not needing me anymore, about being alone. Now I honor him by loving the people I would have turned away, by creating opportunities for students like Bethany who deserve support and recognition but are dismissed because they don't come from the right families or the right neighborhoods or don't fit the narrow definition of what success is supposed to look like." Victoria Pemberton spent 1 year mourning a son she thought she knew completely, visiting his grave with flowers and tears and the crushing guilt of someone who'd lost their only child before making peace with all the ways they'd failed him. But on the first anniversary of Cameron's death, she discovered she hadn't known him at all, that he'd hidden a whole family, a woman he loved and a son who carried his name and his features, because both the women who loved Cameron most had made him afraid to bring them together. Victoria's fear of losing him had made her controlling, had convinced her that managing every aspect of his life was protection instead of suffocation. Bethany's fear of not being enough had made her hidden, had convinced her that waiting for the perfect moment was safer than risking rejection. And Cameron had died in the space between their fears, trying to bridge a gap neither of them would admit existed until it was too late to tell him they were sorry, too late to choose love over fear, too late to be the family he'd begged them to become. But standing at his grave with her grandson playing in the grass and the mother of his child crying beside her, Victoria learned what Cameron had tried to teach them both through his death, if not through his life. That love isn't about control or perfection or protecting people from their choices, because protection becomes prison when it denies people the right to build their own lives. It's about showing up even when you're afraid, even when the person you love makes choices you don't understand or wouldn't make yourself. about making space for the family people choose instead of demanding they choose yours, about understanding that your children loving someone doesn't mean they love you less, about learning to love the people who make your children happy even when it terrifies you that they might. Love someone more than they love you, even when their happiness looks different than what you imagined, even when letting go feels like loss, but is actually the only way to keep them. Sometimes the secrets we keep to protect people hurt them more than the truth ever could. Would you choose your parents' approval or the person you love? And have you ever had to make that impossible choice? Tell us in the comments where you're watching from and rate this story on a scale of 0 to 10. Sometimes learning to love the way our children need us to love comes too late, but healing the wounds we created can honor them in ways we never got to show them while they lived.